Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is, and welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm Larry Erickson, and I'm your host, which you probably would have guessed without me telling you. And for the next almost half hour, I'm going to be ranting away at some stuff that I hope you will find interesting and sometimes maybe even want to do something about. Any questions, reactions, whatever to the show can be sent to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be over here several times during the show. You can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. If you do send me email, please, as always, include something in the subject line to make it clear that it's about the show. This is not spam. And be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm utterly lousy at answering email. But you will get an answer. All right, with that, let's get on with it. I'm going to start. I was going to do a couple of things this week, which I think I'm not going to have time for, so I'm going to have to put them off till next week. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'm going to start, as I always like to when I can, with some good news. And I actually have some bits of good news coming from what is still, for the most part, an unexpected place, despite the loss of Team Reactionary's heaviest hitter. On March 22nd, the Supreme Court, in a 6-2 decision on a class action suit, ruled that workers at a Tyson Foods plant were entitled to overtime and damages because Tyson refused to pay them for time involved in certain work-related activities. Following up on that, on April 4th, the court refused to hear appeals of two other class action suits. These two involved Walmart and Wells Fargo. The Walmart case alleged that certain workers in Pennsylvania were not paid for all hours worked and were prevented from taking full meal and rest breaks. The Pennsylvania State Supreme Court awarded the workers $187 million in damages. In the Wells Fargo case, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in San Francisco, found that the claim that the bank, Wells Fargo Bank, had imposed excessive withdrawal fees, or overdraft fees rather, excessive overdraft fees, was valid, and the outcome was a $203 million judgment against the company. The Supreme Court's refusal to hear the appeals of those cases means that the lower court decisions, those pro-consumer, pro-worker lower court decisions, stand. So despite the best efforts of corporate lawyers and reactionary Supreme Court justices, class action suits still exist and have just won 3 in a row at the Supreme Court. And how is that not good news? But there's more good news coming out of the Supreme Court, believe it or not. This one, I suppose, could be filed under the heading "dodged a bullet" rather than outright good news, but then again, I suppose it's always a good thing to dodge a bullet, but never mind. The case is called Friedrichs v. California Teachers Association. A couple of self-interested pawns were rounded up by a reactionary right-wing law firm that was out to undermine public sector unions. They were doing this by filing a suit challenging the practice of agency fees. Specifically in public employee unions here, under which unions can require non-members to pay a fee to cover those non-members' share of the cost of collective bargaining. That is, share their share of the cost of reaching the contract which covers those non-members rather. The principle of for such fees was set down in a 1977 Supreme Court case. Now, here, in this case, these plaintiffs sought to overturn that 1977 ruling, claiming that it violated their right of free speech to have to pay anything for the benefits that the union obtained for them through collective bargaining. That is, they should be able to collect all the benefits, while other people should bear all the burdens and pay all the costs, which makes them pretty typical right-wingers. Anyway, what actually happened is that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the teachers' union in the case and added that it was bound by the precedent set in the 1977 case. So, of course, these selfish free riders, backed by their well-heeled right-wing law firm, appealed the case to the Supreme Court. When oral arguments were held in January, it looked like the court was headed for a 5-4 decision in favor of the greedheads and the free riders. But now with only 8 members, the court deadlocked 4-4, which means that the lower court ruling in favor of the union and against the union busters stands. Now, this is unlikely to be the end of this particular issue, but at least for now, we see that a Supreme Court lacking Justice Antonin Skeletor is incapable of doing the damage that it otherwise could. But the fact is, believe it or not, that even a court with Skeletor still on it could have done a good thing. In a unanimous decision on April 4th, the Supreme Court smacked down an attempt to rewrite the meaning of the phrase "one person, one vote," a rewrite that would have shifted state-level voting power away from generally more liberal voters to generally more conservative ones. The idea was hatched in the fetid brain of a right-wing legal hack named Edward Blum, who recruited a couple of stand-ins to put their name to a suit, which became known as Evansville v. Abbott. The suit claims that the way the state of Texas drew up its state redistricting map violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, currently, and in line with decades of precedent, states draw up district lines for state-level legislative offices in a way that each district contains about the same number of people, with some variation. About 10% variation is regarded as acceptable. All 50 states use this method. The suit wanted this change to be about the same number of eligible voters in each district. Thus, for example, in this population count for representation, children wouldn't be counted. Non-citizens, even if they're living here legally, wouldn't be counted. Those without the franchise because of some criminal matter wouldn't be counted. Because these and other groups are more heavily concentrated in cities, which tend to be more liberal than compared to more rural areas, the change in counting method would shift the counted population from the cities to those more rural areas. And those rural areas tend to be more conservative, which of course was the point all along, to increase the power of conservative voters. Well, the effort failed miserably. A unanimous decision smacked it down. Writing for the court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, perhaps bearing in mind the principle that elected representatives are supposed to represent everybody, not just voters, said the ruling was based on, quoting her, constitutional history, the court's decisions, and long-standing precedent. And she also said that adopting a new approach, quoting, would upset a well-functioning approach that all 50 states and countless local jurisdictions have followed for decades, even centuries. As the current saying has it, bam. There is one quick footnote to this. This actually only affects state-level offices, not federal offices, because the Constitution requires using a state's total population in order to divvy up and allot out seats in the House of Representatives. All right, moving on from there, we actually have an RIP this week, and these are becoming depressingly common. Patty Duke died March 29th at the age of 69, another 69-year-old. The cause of death was sepsis from a ruptured tumor in her intestine. I expect Patty Duke is best known for two things: her Oscar-winning role as Helen Keller in the original version of The Miracle Worker, and her TV sitcom, The Patty Duke Show, which ran for 3 seasons in the early 1960s. But she was a good deal more than that. For one thing, later on she won 3 Emmys. But beyond that, she was actively involved in the world around her. For example, at one time, she was president of the Screen Actors Guild. And after being diagnosed as bipolar in 1982, Duke, whose real name, by the way, was Anna Marie Duke, became an advocate for mental health programs. And a while back, she apparently seriously considered a run for public office. Her last, if you will, public appearance, interestingly, was just a week before her death, when she and her husband turned out to participate in the Idaho Democratic caucuses. So R.I.P. Patty Duke. It seems that we did not know you as well as we should have. All right, next up is an update, and I have to admit I'm really angry about this one. In January, I spoke about what I called the mostly good news, that the feds had largely ended a program called Equitable Sharing. This program was a corrupt outgrowth of the corrupt practice of civil asset forfeiture, itself a corrupt outgrowth of the corrupt war on drugs. Civil asset forfeiture, you got to understand, allows cops to seize assets based on nothing more than a claimed belief, not evidence, not proof, belief that the asset in question was involved in or purchased with the proceeds of illegal drug activity. They can do this even when they have no basis to bring charges against the person whose asset was seized. Under this program, cops have seized money, computers, TV, jewelry, cars, even homes and businesses without ever presenting or even having to present a single shred of evidence that the owners had done anything illegal. Once an asset is seized, it becomes the responsibility of the person whose property was taken to prove that this asset was not involved or on the proceeds of illegal drug activity. That is, they have to prove a negative, and the burden of proof is on them to do it. And remember, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. You have no right to an attorney here. So if you can't pay for one out of your own pocket, you're out of luck. Costs to try to recover your property can easily run to the thousands of dollars. In fact, it can run to thousands of dollars more than the asset is actually even worth, which is why a lot of people don't even try to get their stuff back. Well, under equitable sharing, under this program, local cops could choose to pursue a civil forfeiture case under federal law rather than under state law. That is in any case where a federal agency was involved, no matter how tangential that involvement was. Here's the point. Under many state laws now, the cops get to keep some portion of the assets that are seized. But under federal law, they get to keep a whopping 80% of the assets. So equitable sharing, in effect, acted as an incentive for cops to make an end run around their own state's laws and seize anything and everything they can get their hands on in order to fatten their departmental budgets. Which is why I said it was mostly good news that equitable sharing was mostly being closed down. But the bastards couldn't leave it alone. On April 4th, the Department of Justice reinstated the program, citing, get this, an improved budget situation. Civil asset forfeiture has gotten so far out of hand that in 2014, the last year for which we have full figures, cops stole more stuff this way than burglars did. And equitable sharing, the evil spawn of civil asset forfeiture, only makes this worse. It is disgusting, and it and the whole thing of civil asset forfeiture should die a quick death. All right, now for one of our regular features. This is the Clown Award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. And oh my, have we been drowning in clowns the last 2 weeks. So much so that for a short time, I was tempted to do a show of nothing but Clown Awards, a solid half hour of inanity and clownishness. But instead, what I did is I pared the number down to just 4. So our third runner-up this week in the competition for the Big Red Nose is Terrence Veninga of Chakota, Oklahoma. Last August, the Save Yourself Survival and Tactical Gear Store and Gun Range in nearby Outrage, Oklahoma, population 390, declared itself to be a Muslim-free zone, with one of the owners, Chad Neal, saying he didn't want to have any jihadis training on our gun range. Because obviously, if I was a jihadist, a terrorist looking to improve my marksmanship, the Save Yourself Survival and Tactical Gear Gun Store and Range in Outrage, Oklahoma is the first place I'd think to go. Congratulations on defending America, Mr. Neal. Which brings us in turn to Mr. Veninga. He and some other self-described patriots have been, get this now, defending the store, against what isn't clear, by standing around outside it with loaded guns. You know what's coming. His gun, an old Colt 45, fell from its bucket holster, hit the ground, and went off, shooting him in the wrist. Yeah, that's right. This patriotic defending a patriotic gun store against the hordes of anti-patriots preparing for an assault on Outrage, Oklahoma, succeeded only in shooting himself. A worthy entrant in our competition for the Clown Award. Our second runner-up also involves the issue of guns. The clown here is the Republican Party. Leaders of the Republican Party have made it clear that they will brook no interference with the right of every person to carry any gun they want, anywhere, anytime. The Second Amendment, the sainted Second Amendment, and our very freedom demand no less. Well, carry it almost anywhere, anytime. One place that won't be happening is the Republican National Convention, where packing heat is to be strictly forbidden. Now, the party can claim it's not them, it's the venue, because the Quicken Loans Arena in Cleveland, Ohio, where this will happen, bans carrying guns on its property, which, because it's private property, it can do. And, of course, private property is the only thing that the goppers think is more holy than guns. Maybe. The thing is, though, the party did not have to choose that venue. They could have picked someplace else that did allow guns. Or maybe they could have purchased additional insurance in order to indemnify the arena against any claims against it, against anything that might have happened, in order to convince the owners to change their minds. But they didn't. Okay, but then again, after this question came up, the Secret Service categorically ruled out the idea of any guns on the conventions. What about that? Yeah, that's true, but again, these brave, rough and tough stalwarts of the right could have simply declined Secret Service protection and said, we're self-reliant, free Americans will take care of ourselves. But they didn't. Now, is that hypocrisy? It's more likely they were just scared too many of their delegates would be less like some superhero and more like Terrence Veninga, which doesn't make them, though, any less clowns. All right, our first runner-up, winner of the size 18 floppy shoes, is a man who under normal circumstances will be a runaway winner most every week. He is Paul LePage, the governor of Maine, and a man who makes Donald the Rump look like Bertrand Russell. On March 31st, the Labor Committee of the Maine State Senate rejected LePage's nominee to the State Unemployment Insurance Commission on a party line vote. So on April 1st, the next day, LePage canceled a swearing-in ceremony for Susan Demonschalt, who had just won a special election to go into the Senate on Tuesday. And his office specifically and openly stated that it was canceled because of the Labor Committee vote. LePage then also withdrew 3 of his nominees, including 2 who hadn't even been voted on yet. He gave no reason. But it doesn't matter, because we know the reason. Paul LePage is a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum and a clown. And we actually are going to take a break right here, and we will come back and tell you who actually gets the Clown Award. And here we are back in order to give away the Clown Award. All right, the thing is, what could top all of what's gone before? Something that goes beyond the silly, the hypocritical, or the childish to something that has actual significant impact on actual people's lives. So the winner of the dishonor of the Big Red Nose this week is Idaho Governor Butch Otter, who apparently has the IQ of his namesake without the compensation of the nice fur. Idaho is one of the idiot states that has not taken advantage of Medicaid expansion. As a result, around 78,000 folks in Idaho fall in what's called the coverage gap between Medicaid and eligibility for subsidies under Obamacare. This is the gap that the Medicaid expansion was intended to fill. Now, many of the folks in that gap can't afford access to health care. But I should say, don't worry, the legislators swear they have begun to take up the issue of Medicaid expansion in a meaningful way, taking up the issue a mere 4 years after the option first became available. And what of Governor Otter his mind? He'd like to see something happen, he said, but he isn't really worried about it because, see, he doesn't agree with the claim that people in Idaho could be dying because they call in that coverage gap and so can't get health insurance. After all, he said, and here it comes, I see plenty of people in hospitals and they have insurance and they're in the hospital, but they still die. That's right. According to our clown, because people with health insurance can still die, people without health insurance are no worse off. Having access to health care doesn't make a difference because we all die. Idaho Governor Butch Otter his skull. You can't get to be much more of a clown than that. All right, and now, directly from there, we move to our other regular feature. This is the Outrage of the Week. And actually, because we've been away for 2 weeks now, we actually have 2 outrages. There's actually a plethora of possibilities, but these are the 2. First is that one of the little-known provisions of the SNAP program, that's the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, people still know it as food stamps, but one of the little-known provisions is its designation of able-bodied adults without dependents. This refers to low-income adults age 18 to 49 who don't have children. This group includes some of the poorest people in the United States who earn on average only 17% of the official poverty rate, or that is around $150 to $170 a month in income. Now, despite that fact, the 1996 Welfare Reform Law imposes work requirements on these people. They are eligible for only 90 days of food stamp assistance unless they have paid employment or a job training program of at least 20 hours a week. Now, in the wake of the financial collapse of 2008, states with high unemployment could apply for waivers of that requirement, but the standards were tough. Unemployment not only had to be high, it had to be significantly higher than the national average. As the official unemployment rate has come down, fewer states can qualify for the waiver, and fewer still have sought to get them. In 2015, 22 states began reimposing work requirements on these people, and this year 22 more will join them. The 90-day clock on benefits started running as of January 1st, which means on April 1st it ran out, and people are starting to lose their benefits. As a result, it is estimated that as many as 1 million people, again including some of the poorest of the poor in this country, will lose food stamps this year. And it's always being done with the same tired cliches that always get thrown at the poor, that assume that they are just shiftless or lazy or both. The work requirement, we're told, will, and this is a quote, encourage people to rejoin the workforce. It will discourage dependency, and perhaps the worst, anybody can find a 20-hour job. Well, the fact is that the average length of time it takes unemployed Americans to find new jobs is now roughly 30 weeks. That's less than the record length of time set in 2011, but it's still 2.5 times longer than 90 days. So will these requirements encourage work? Will they discourage dependency? Of course not. The notion of the shiftless, lazy poor is nothing but a vile fantasy concocted to justify our own indifference to the needs of others. What they will do is increase hunger at the expense of, I will say it again, the poorest of the poor in this country. And it is happening in silence without any notice from any major political figure. And that is an outrage. So, all right, what could top that? Try this. According to a Reuters Ipsos poll taken at the end of March, nearly 2/3 of Americans, 63% to be more exact, 63% of Americans believe that torture is often or sometimes justified when directed against suspected terrorists to obtain information. That's an increase of 19 percentage points from a 2014 survey by Amnesty International. In the new survey, only 15% of respondents rejected torture. And yes, while more goppers than Democrats endorse torture, still a majority of the party of our Nobel Peace Prize Prez said, yeah, sure, waterboarding, maybe pull out a few fingernails, what the heck. These poll numbers put us in the same general category, same territory as Nigeria, which is fighting a 7-year-old insurgency that has driven 2 million people from their homes and killed thousands upon thousands more, and Kenya, which has been the target of a string of lethal attacks launched by the terrorist group Al-Shabaab. So the question I have is, what is wrong with us? How did we become such a timorous, frightened, trembling people? How do we come to throw away our sense of morality, our sense of humanity, in support of forms of brutality that, in fact, don't even work? Because no, torture does not work. It doesn't work. Period. Not only are there numerous studies, both historical and psychological, to show it, our own U.S. Senate knows it. A 2014 report by the Senate Intelligence Committee determined that the torture, the enhanced interrogation, used by the CIA in the years after 9/11 were essentially useless. Even the 20 examples the CIA came up with to say that, well, torture is not completely useless, were characterized by the committee report as wrongly described. The best you can hope for with torture is that it is useless, rather than being counterproductive by being both useless and increasing anger against us. I mean, this should be old news. It is old news. So why are so many people in the home of the brave huddling in the corner, sucking their thumbs, clutching a security blanket? It has become difficult for me at times to not be ashamed of being an American. Back in December, there was a brief fuss when the New York Times revealed allegations that back in 2012, Navy SEALs had tortured detainees in their care in Afghanistan. When some Army soldiers who witnessed this reported it to their superiors, not only did the SEALs receive no serious discipline, the brutal methods they used continued to be used until an innocent Afghan man died in less than a day in their custody. And the whole thing was hushed up, it was covered up, it was hidden. And the thing is, it now appears that they didn't need to bother hiding it. And that truly, truly is an outrage. All right, I'm going to say this very quickly. I've got about 2 minutes left, I expect, so I'm going to mention this because I just wanted to finish up with something lighter. So we're going to have an episode of And Another Thing, which is our occasional step away from politics into cool science stuff. In this case, it's archaeology and anthropology. Because the Norse sagas and Viking legends are often ripping good yarns of exploration and discovery with some epic battles thrown in, kind of like Peter Jackson for history geeks, also provided enough historical material that they enabled the discovery in 1960 of a Viking settlement at the northern northern coast of Newfoundland, a place called Lansing Meadows. It was the only known Viking settlement in North America until possibly now. Archaeologists using satellite images have discovered what they believe to be a Viking site at Point Ross at the southeast tip of Newfoundland, some nearly 400 miles south of Lansing Meadows. Excavations have uncovered a Norse-style hearth and 8 kilograms of bog ore, and the Norse were the only ones extracting ore from bogs 1,000 years ago. Now, it remains to be proven this is actually a Norse site. In fact, it took several years before Lansing Meadows everybody agreed was a Norse site. So it still has to, a lot of work still has to be done. But if it is confirmed, it would widen and deepen our understanding and knowledge of the Viking experience in North America, which personally I find rather exciting because, after all, Vikings looting and pillaging their way across 100 years of European history, that's my heritage. So you have the best week you possibly can. I got to get out of here. We will see you next week with more stuff. A couple of things I was going to cover this week, but I promised myself I am going to do them next week. And for now, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, peace.